Dear listeners of the Female Guides Requested podcast, welcome back and happy Wednesday. This is your host, Ting Ting. Right now, I am in my home country, Taiwan, teaching some rock climbing courses. Our guest today is Emma Walker. Emma spends a lot of time outdoors and currently serves as the education director for the American Institute for Avalanche Research and Education. Emma is a career outdoor educator with a background in curriculum design and a particular interest in accident analysis. A jewel of all trades, she has worked as a raft guide, avalanche educator, and in numerous other outdoor jobs, and has also made ends meet as a waitress, horse groom, and kindergarten teacher. She lives in Spring Green, Wisconsin with her husband, son, and 2 badly behaved dogs. Talking with Emma was so soothing. She answered all my questions with thoughtfulness and compassion. I gained so much knowledge from our conversations and couldn't wait to incorporate all that wisdom into my daily guiding because, as she said, good guiding is education. Now, please enjoy this episode with Emma Walker. Great. Emma, welcome to the Female Guides Requested podcast. I'm so happy that Kristen connect us together. So this is I think this is a new one because right now your main job is more of like this overseeing avalanche education type of role, right? Even though in the past you've been in the field a lot.
Yeah. Yes, exactly. Thank you. And thanks so much for having me, Ting Ting. I'm really excited to be here. It is a little different. I have worked in the field a lot over the course of my career, and now for the past 4 years, I've worked full-time for AIARE, which is the American Institute for Avalanche Research and Education. It's a mouthful, hence the acronym. I started out as a program manager there for about 3 years, and then just this last summer, summer 2024, I moved into the education director role. So now I oversee all of our recreational and professional programs for the whole organization.
Nice. And Kristen told me that you really have to interview Emma, that she's actually my boss right now. Yeah. But
that's funny.
So maybe I would just dig into a little bit of your background story. On your website, you mentioned that I spent a lot of time outside. Did you know there's a school where they'll give you a master's degree for that? So obviously you are very enthusiastic about being outside. Can you tell me that what the love of and the passion toward outdoors does that stem from your upbringing, how you grew up, and how did all that happen?
Yeah, that's a really good question, and one I've been thinking about a lot now that I am a parent. I think a lot about how to instill in my own kiddo the same love of the outdoors and the natural world that my parents instilled in me. And I think one of the biggest things is we did spend a lot of time outside when I was a kid, but it wasn't necessarily organized, right? It wasn't always, we're going camping, we're going hiking. It's like this activity that's planned, down to every minute. It was a lot of just going to the park and playing. And we did go for a lot of hikes. And when my mom is a really good skier and actually still can totally kick my butt. I have a hard time keeping up with her at the ski area. But my mom was who taught me to ski. And when she would take me when I was a kid, we would ski a few runs in the morning. And then when I would get tired and say, okay, I'm ready to go to the lodge and have hot chocolate, she would always say, okay. And then we would go hang out and have a hot cocoa. And maybe we'd ski a little more and maybe we didn't. And, the beauty of the season pass, which in the 90s was much more affordable than it is now. The beauty of that was that we were able to just spend some time. And then when I would get tired or cranky or be kind of done with things, it was never this battle of like, no, we have to stay out and get our money's worth. You've got to get tougher. You've got to be a better skier. I kind of joke that maybe if my mom had been a little harder on me, I might be a better skier, but I doubt I would enjoy skiing as much. So I think that was a lot of it is we spent a lot of time outside just enjoying being outside, and it wasn't necessarily organized. There was no pressure. My parents were also really avid cyclists. They got really into road biking when they first got married. It was kind of neither of them had done it before, so they got into it as an activity to do together, to learn something new together, and continued to do that throughout their marriage. And then when I was a kid, my aunt, my dad's little sister, was diagnosed with multiple sclerosis. And my parents got really involved in the National MS Society and formed a team, a cycling team, because there was this annual fundraiser called the MS 150 that was a 150-mile bike ride in Colorado. They formed a cycling team called Team Sugar Bee, and every year the team rode this ride and fundraised and was a huge friends and family team that raised over $1 million for multiple sclerosis research. So that was also a huge part of my upbringing, was like spending time on bikes and outside with friends and family. And it was always a fun thing. It was never a competitive thing, which was really awesome.
I see. And so you mentioned you grew up in Colorado then?
I did. Yeah. I grew up on the Front Range in kind of in the Golden, Arvada area.
And then back when you were growing up, skiing, maybe cycling, but basic playing outside.
Playing. Yeah,
Yeah,
exactly.
playing was more
Totally.
like the theme, and then just kind of submerge yourself into the environment. And
Yeah.
yes. And was that why that you chose to study outdoor and environmental education?
Yeah, I think that set me up really well for it. You know, my family are all teachers. My dad was a teacher. He's sort of retired now, although actually he just got his license to be a substitute. So he still works as a teacher a couple days a week. My grandparents were both public school teachers. So when I went to college, I didn't even really think about it. I didn't have like a great sense of what I wanted to do. So I just decided I would become a teacher. And that was fine. I think, you know, I studied English literature because that was my best subject in high school. And I got my secondary education licensure to be a high school English teacher. And then as I was student teaching, the reality kind of hit me that I would be inside all the time if that were my full-time job. And I loved the education aspect. I really enjoyed the kids, and that part was really fun. And I found it super fulfilling. And I also, on a beautiful day, would be looking out the window and waiting for it to be 3:30 for the bell to ring so I could get outside, and I would feel super antsy. So I started really thinking about whether there were opportunities to do the parts that I loved, teaching people stuff, and combine that with spending more time not in a traditional classroom setting, which is how I discovered this idea of outdoor and environmental education as a career. I had done a NOLS course. My parents really generously gifted me a NOLS course for my college graduation. And I had backpacked a couple times, like 1 or 2 nights. And then suddenly I was in the wilderness for, I think it was a
30 days.
24-day course. Yeah.
Okay. Yes.
It was a really long time in the Beartooth Absarokas in Montana. And it was, it was really challenging and really wonderful. And I learned so much. And I remember probably a week into the course thinking, man, if I make it through this, I'm never doing this again. And by the end of the course, I had the exact opposite feeling, and I couldn't wait to get back out there. Immediately after I finished that course, I started that semester of student teaching where I felt so antsy. And I think the combination of those experiences led me to, okay, I need to figure out a different solution that involves teaching and not being stuck in a traditional classroom.
Nice. Yeah, you remind me because I took some of those courses myself, and I also taught. I was a nose instructor back then, and a long time in the wilderness somehow can transform people
I can't even describe it. It's just like you mentioned that when you start, it's just like, this is not for me. But after you got used to it and then you really enjoying the intense experience being outside.
Totally. Yeah, it really was this experience that was transformative in ways I never expected. I think I went into it sort of, I almost feel like if I had known what it was going to be like, I would have been too afraid to do it. So I'm glad I didn't know about all the challenges because I'm so glad I did it. And it was this totally transformative experience. I mean, I really feel like it set the trajectory of my life. I, I really, I really found this career and met the person that I ended up marrying. And all of this stuff I feel like was set in motion by this one wilderness experience that was so transformative to me.
It's like that was really interesting is that, well, you didn't know what to expect, but you didn't expect, but turns out it was a very positive experience. And I like that because sometimes I know that nowadays you can find a lot of information, say, about a route or a mountain range. And then the more you study, you just like, oh my God, I think my ability doesn't match all the challenge
Totally.
there. And then so people have hard time to rise up and challenge themselves. But they didn't realize they actually do have a lot of power with them.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think, of course, it's important to inform yourself and know the risks. And um, I don't want to make too much of a metaphor out of this, but I also think sometimes it's okay to just put yourself into an experience and it's okay not to know what the outcome is going to be. Um, I think, yeah, there are so many things since then in my life too that I've thought to myself afterwards, wow, if I'd known what this was going to be like, I don't know that I would have applied or moved there or whatever it is. But I'm so glad I did. And I think that's kind of I try to be open to new experiences. And this really, that Knowles course really was kind of the first time that I articulated to myself, you can do a really hard thing. Um, Not only was I was really homesick, it was a really physically demanding course. I hadn't done that kind of like off-trail travel. And it was really challenging. And I came out of it feeling like, wow, I am way tougher than I thought I was. And what a great feeling for a young woman. I think I was 21 when I finished the course. And feeling like I was tougher than I expected was a really good and important feeling for me.
So two questions. Then how did you end up in, right? Your school was in Alaska, right? Is it right?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
why did you choose Alaska and how did you end up?
Yeah. Um, I, towards the end of that semester of student teaching, knew, you know, all my peers were signing contracts to work at schools, and I knew that that wasn't the path for me. So I started looking into programs that I just figured if I didn't know what to do next, I would just go back to school. That was totally my next, like, okay, I'm not sure what to do here. I guess I'll just keep going until I figure out what I'm going to do. And so I looked up a few different programs that did outdoor or experiential education. And I thought maybe I would go back to school and get an undergraduate degree in biology. And I really seriously considered that. But the education piece was such a big draw for me. And so my guidance counselor at CU Boulder, where I did my undergrad, mentioned Alaska Pacific University as having this Master of Science program in outdoor and environmental education. And I figured it couldn't hurt to apply. So it's these really small cohorts. There were, I think, 9 people in my cohort. So I applied and they told me you should probably come visit here, you know, visit Alaska when it's really cold and dark to make sure that you really want to commit to this. So my mom and my boyfriend at the time and I all went up in January of, I think it was 2012. And my mom, I think, thought I was totally nuts, but I remember really distinctly, like, there was this really, really cold day, and I was looking over the Matanuska River, and there was just this incredible sunrise, at 10:30 a.m. And it was just the most incredible thing. And I just had this feeling like this is where I'm supposed to be. I just totally felt like Alaska was the place where I was going to do whatever I needed to do next. And so after I finished my semester of student teaching and the end of that summer, I finished out an internship at the American Alpine Club and then moved to Anchorage to start this graduate program. So it's a 2-year graduate program, and the first year takes place at this small converted dairy farm. I guess the farm itself isn't small, it's like 800 acres, but the classes themselves are in this little farmhouse, and we're all sitting like around the fireplace in these overstuffed chairs talking about pedagogical theory. And I felt like I had found my place, like I'd really found my people. And then the second year, there's a little bit more studying of it's more of a thesis project or program. So you've got a specific topic and you're doing some research methods, and then you're doing your actual research. And most people graduate in 4 or 5 semesters. So that was how I ended up in Anchorage.
Then how much time you spent outside? Because you mentioned that you spent a lot of time outside when you were studying. I'm really curious, and especially it's like cold, right? In January too. Probably it's not the best time to spend outside.
No, it's really cold in Alaska in January. So let's see. That first year, I had my classes, and other than that, I was just all I wanted to do was explore. And graduate school is famously not great for that. So I didn't have a ton of free time, but really tried to make the most of what I did. And then Alaska Pacific University has this incredible outdoor studies program. It's an undergraduate program, and there are a ton of field-based courses, including one on basic winter wilderness skills. And so I finagled my way into that course to get graduate level credit, to essentially do some sort of elective credits by taking that course, which meant that I had the month of January to spend of my first year of grad school. I went out with this course into the Talkeetna Mountains for a month of this course called Winter Wilderness. And in my memory, we did like one overnight in a yurt to kind of practice and get our systems dialed. And then we did a couple days down at Center Ridge, which is on Turnagain Pass on the Kenai Peninsula. And then the big finale was I can't remember, I think it was probably 12 or 14 days in the Talkeetna Mountains. And it was, oh my God, it was so cold. Like one day, I think when I went to bed, the thermometer was reading 20 degrees above 0 Fahrenheit. And the next morning, the thermometers had bottomed out and weren't working anymore. And they bottomed out at 40 below. So
whoa,
it was really cold. And actually on that trip, I ended up getting frostbite on a couple of toes and having to be evacuated. So you'd think it wouldn't be a great introduction, but I still was totally hooked, and I still couldn't get enough. I felt like, again, I felt like I had just found what I was meant to do. And I was so amazed by the instructors on that program, and I learned so much. That was my first, it was also my first Avalanche course was part of that class. And I just felt like, don't get me wrong, the burger I had right after being evacuated was like the best thing I've ever tasted. And then right after that, I was like, oh, I'm really just bummed to not be in the field anymore. And I really missed being outside. So, I felt like I was really like finding out a lot about who I was at that point.
Oh, can you try to articulate that? Why do you think you just belong there?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I think when I moved to Alaska, I felt a connection to the landscape that I had never really felt or understood before. In my graduate program, we talked a lot about about place-based education. And so experiential and outdoor education being a way to connect to a landscape. And, I think about that a lot now as I'm in this really different place than I was in Alaska. I live in Wisconsin in the driftless area. And I really enjoyed watching the landscape change over the course of the seasons and over the course of a year. And I think when I was younger, I was really captivated by these big, beautiful, almost overwhelming landscapes. And I needed that sort of adrenaline. And then on this winter wilderness course, where it was really cold and I was moving really slowly, and often the view wasn't these big mountains, right? It was just like the snowy drainage in front of me. And I really was forced to slow down and notice things in a way that I just had never been able to or bothered to before. And I think moving slowly through a landscape and caring about the wildlife that I'm interacting with and with the landscape that I'm interacting with, and having to, work to melt snow for water, and the routine, even though it seems sort of burdensome sometimes, but the routine of the day, I felt like I was paying attention to every moment in a way I never had before in my life. And it was so grounding to feel so present all the time. I wasn't thinking about what was going on at home or how I needed to find a summer job or any kind of like relationship stuff. I really was just able to be present in the moment. And when I got back from that trip, even though it didn't end how I wanted it to, I just kept feeling like I had to keep chasing that feeling of feeling totally alive and totally present in the moment.
Oh, that's beautiful, and that's very interesting. I really enjoying the experience you share. That's beautiful. And
Thank you.
yeah. And just kind of like all your senses are tuned in the environment. And there's no other distraction because you're living there. There's no other things, but just the great landscape and then the things right in front of you.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. And I think I kind of got this practice with it in Alaska. And then, I got to do a couple of other really, really cool kind of once in a lifetime sort of trips when I was up there. Later that first year of grad school, there was another sort of expedition mountaineering skills course. And we did a traverse of the Harding ice field, like this kind of corner of the Harding ice field. And that was, again, one of those experiences that I came off of feeling like, wow, I'm so much tougher than I thought I was. I'm really capable of a lot more than I thought I was. I carried this 90-pound pack, and I'm really tough. And I think since then, I've really tried to remember, it's those really quiet moments. Like, yes, there are these really exciting moments, or these moments where you're kind of in a flow state and you feel like just everything is happening as it's supposed to, and you're almost watching yourself go through the motions. And that's really wonderful. But I think the moments I've started to really live for are like when you get up to pee in the middle of the night and you look outside and those stars are there. You're like, oh, I laid in my sleeping bag having to pee for so long because I didn't want to get cold. And now I'm out here and I'm seeing the Milky Way, and this is so incredible. And it's these quiet moments that make you feel like you're getting to know a landscape that I think have started to be like, that's what I look forward to now. And I think, I don't know, maybe some of it is having had a couple of like scary or near miss experiences, or my priorities have shifted, but it's those moments that feel almost like a really intimate moment with a landscape, I think, that really resonate with me now.
Definitely. And it's a very rich experience. And it doesn't need to be dramatic. It's,
Right,
yeah,
exactly.
right. It's just a moment. It's hard to describe because everybody have different experience, right? But then when you are in there, you say, wow, this is it.
Yeah.
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 And
Uh,
how about the education part? Like, you said that you're really into education, right? And then that's why you study. So, so you want to combine, I can see the love toward the outdoors. How about the education part?
yeah, I mean, I think they're actually really closely related. I think um, the first few times I got to introduce someone to that kind of experience, like those moments we were just talking about, seeing the look on someone's face as they experience something like that is just so cool. It's so fun to get to be part of somebody's introduction. And, I think about um, the first few times I went to Moab, like driving in and seeing those big red cliffs for the first time. And then, when I've been with friends, one of the things I really looked forward to most if they hadn't been there before was to like watch their face as we drove in and see them like taking in this incredible out of this world landscape for the first time. And on a wilderness trip, there's so many moments like that. Even like, there are these huge landscapes like that, but there's also those really small, you see a group of sandhill cranes flying overhead and making their calls, or there's so many different like little things to experience. And I think not only getting to introduce people to the natural world, but to help them move through it safely and comfortably, and to have to help people discover the same feeling that I did of like, whoa, I'm actually a lot tougher than I thought I was. Um, Guiding people to finding that inner toughness and that ability to take care of themselves and to take care of others, um, has just like filled my cup in a way that nothing I've ever done otherwise has.
Yeah. Now I'm wondering, so what's your definition of experiential learning?
Hmm, that's a really good question. I feel like it seems like it should be really cut and dry, but there's more to it, I think. I think experiential learning sort of has this reputation as just like, oh, any sort of kinesthetic or hands-on learning is experiential, learn by doing. Um, and I think the other component that's really important about experiential learning is that it's learner-centered and learner-driven. So rather than being something where it's like, okay, I'm trying to think of a good example. Um, Rather than just taking people for a hike in the woods, for example, and saying like, okay, we're going to learn about the natural world. We're going to learn about this ecosystem. We're all going to go for a hike together through this state park, because we have certain learning outcomes that we're going to meet. Being able to offer learner-centered education means incorporating people into the learning outcomes into their own learning outcomes, right? So saying, what do you want to get out of this experience? What does this mean to you to go on this hike together, to have this experience together? And like getting buy-in from people by having them even help plan the experience and understanding like what are we going to do together and what are we going to get out of it? The what and the now what and the so what. Um, I think centering things on what learners actually need rather than on just telling them what we think they should know is really what makes the difference between the sort of traditional education and experiential education.
Hmm. Yeah, because as guiding goes, I always think that I'm trying to help them to create this experience. So they would leave the day or the week or however, how long, with some sort of appreciation, growth, or whatever goal they bring to the table. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, to me, that is experiential education,
Okay.
right? I think,
Mm-hmm.
I think, um, there, like, of course, there are differences in different settings, but good guiding is education, I think. Um, I think rather than just silently, bringing your client up a route or, like you're interacting with someone, you're teaching them skills, and of course you're tailoring the experience to their needs and interests, and that at its core is what education is, right? You're doing a lot of the same things. You're doing a good guide is doing a formative assessment, right? When their client gets there, saying, what does it seem like you already know? Where are you on your journey? And so where are we starting our journey together? What do I need to do to get you to the goals that you've articulated or that we've worked out together? I think there's a reason a lot of good educators also work as guides and vice versa. I think Kristen Arnold and Sheldon Kerr are examples of that, of folks who have this ethos of guiding as education as well. Um, we need more folks like that to be doing that kind of work.
For sure. Then I'm curious. Well, you skied when you were a kid ever since, and then you enjoying Alaska, the wild, beautiful range, and then also the cold winter. And where did this kayaking and whitewater thing that fit in your life?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I think um,
Because you
the
taught kayaking, right? And then you also was a whitewater guide.
yeah, I worked as a whitewater. I was never a whitewater kayaker. I was not that particular brand of brave. Um, but I did
So
work as
was
a
that
whitewater
sea
raft guide.
kayaking or touring
Yep, and I
kayaking?
did some sea kayaking.
Yeah.
Yeah. Which I still like personally really enjoy, and enjoy teaching. And I was a whitewater raft guide, um, for one season. Um, I think I had these really fond memories when I was a kid. One of my best friends in grade school, her family owned a small whitewater rafting outfitter that did these trips on the Arkansas River and the Upper Colorado. And her really brave, wonderful, patient parents would take out Hannah and a bunch of her friends. And so every summer, I got to go on this really fun rafting trip. And I just remembered that was maybe one of my earliest introductions to those kind of that sense of like belonging in a place, feeling that I described earlier. And I think I had these really strong positive memories associated with that. And so after I finished grad school, I applied for a bunch of jobs and nothing really panned out. It was a time that it was tough to get a job with the federal government, which is like where a lot of my peers ended up going. And I just was once again finished school feeling kind of at loose ends and not sure where to go next. Um, and so my husband and I, or my then fiance and I, um, we had actually met working as instructors at an overnight camp in Colorado the summer before, had like a whirlwind romance. And then he moved to Alaska. He'd always talked about moving to Alaska. And so he was like, you're already there? Great. I'll just come move in with you. And the rest is history. Um, so we moved back down to Colorado. We were going to get married later that summer. And I didn't really have a plan, so I applied to this whitewater raft guide school, kind of like a rookie raft guide crash course. And successful folks who completed, if you successfully completed the rookie raft guide school, you would get offered a job as a guide at this outfitter. So I figured I'll learn some skills and maybe I'll end up getting some work at the end of it, but it'd be great to learn how to do it. And that is one of those experiences that if I'd known what I was getting myself into, I probably wouldn't have done it. Um, it was really tough. We were on Clear Creek in Colorado, which is it's this It's not glamorous at all. It runs along I-70 and it's these like just constant big drop rapids. And it's, yeah, there's some really technical, it's like really thin, like really classic Colorado creeking in a paddle raft, which is harder to maneuver. So um, I learned a lot and I think became technically a pretty good boatman. And also, I spent the entire summer terrified. And that's kind of why I really only did it for the one summer is my risk tolerance was just not, I just wasn't cut out for it. I liked the interactions with customers and with the other guides. And I liked, um, I was really excited to learn some skills. And also, there was at least one, maybe two fatalities on the river that season. Not with the company I worked for, but with somebody else. And it all just felt a little too real for me. And that, so I now enjoy a nice flat water river trip with some maybe class 2 or 3 rapids. But I'm not looking to do the kind of serious whitewater that I did that summer again.
Wow. So that serious white water, is that probably like class 4 or 5?
Yeah, at different water levels, I think there are a couple of rapids that are considered class 5 a little bit lower down the creek, but the runs that the company that I worked for did went up to class 4 during, kind of the peak water season. And they were serious high consequence rapids. And I think that was one of the, as I think I was 25 when I did that. And that was kind of, again, part of my calibrating my own risk tolerance and my sense of who I was and how I fit into the outdoor community and the industry. And I think I thought of myself as really tough. And at the time, I equated toughness with having a really high risk tolerance. But those two things don't necessarily mean the same thing. And I think that you can be really tough and also not have a very high risk tolerance. I think it was something that hadn't occurred to me until I got into that situation where I felt like, man, I'm a really tough person. I'm willing to like stick it out for a really long time. I feel like I can accomplish most things that I set my mind to, and I don't want to be scared all the time. I think that was kind of a revelation for me that toughness and a high risk tolerance weren't necessarily exactly the same.
I like that. Yeah. Right?
Yeah.
That's
I spent a lot of time thinking about it.
Right. I mean, that's true though. I mean, I think I'm a tough person, but at this level, at this time of my life, I said, sorry, I don't free solo.
Right, exactly.
It's not me. I understand why people do that, but for me, it was like, wait, I can challenge the hard routes. I can do my own trips, but that's just something I just like, you know what, I just check it off. I don't do it. And doesn't affect the toughness I feel or the confidence I feel about myself. Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. There was this feeling of just like, I did it. I know I can do it. And I don't want or need to do it anymore. Like, I don't need to prove that to anybody anymore.
Right. So, it's
which is
your
also
experience.
the thing about getting older.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Maybe not necessarily. I know I'm also getting older, so I'm starting to think about like aging. But a lot of time you feel that traditionally the society think that these two should be put together, but it's not really, right? So people just like, oh, if you're tough, you are like there to challenge in death. So I was just like, no, I think kind of stupid.
Right, exactly. Yeah, I think about a lot of the things that I admire most, like the feats that I admire, are not necessarily these high risk pursuits anymore. I think that just part of it never resonated with me very much. Like, I think, you mentioned at the beginning when we first started talking, that the point of this podcast for you is for women to maybe recognize someone in who's talking, right? To like see something they can, or hear something they can relate to. And I think about like the early days when I first started like dabbling in climbing a little bit and skiing, and like really first started to have a lot of my world be this outdoor world. And the stuff that people got really excited about just like didn't resonate with me because I couldn't picture myself ever doing it. Like when Dean Potter got really into base jumping and everyone was like, oh, he's pushing the envelope. It's so cool. Or like, yes, he was pushing the envelope. He was this like really talented athlete. But I just remember specifically with that being like, sounds scary. I would never want to do that. I can't conceive of myself wanting to do something like that. And it just, yeah, I understood that it was impressive or like that it was unusual, but it just didn't, I wasn't like, that could be me. I really want to try that. But I think now about the kinds of things that I'm like, whoa, that's so cool. One of them is there's this cyclist, Lael Wilcox, who I think she's like my biking hero. I think she's so cool. And she last summer completed the fastest circumnavigation of the globe by bike. It's like a Guinness World Record. And Lael spent, I think, 108 days. I think it was 108 days riding around the world. Like she meticulously planned this trip, and she started in Chicago and rode across the US and then through a bunch of Europe and then through a bunch of like across Australia and then back up to Alaska and then ended in Chicago again. And she did this really cool feat where she talked to all these different people in all these different places, and she had all these incredible experiences and got to see like experience and connect people and culture in all these places around the world. And yes, like she had support, and her partner was there, and they were able to often, like anytime a situation might be unsafe, they were able to mitigate that so that it wasn't necessarily as unsafe. And so, don't get me wrong, I don't think that I could do what Lael did in 108 days. It's like this incredible feat. But it wasn't this thing of like, she's in grave physical danger all the time. And she's like, it's this high risk thing. And she's also riding off cliffs and doing all this like really technical mountain biking. It was just, I have this cool project or this cool goal, and it's going to be really hard. And I mean, man, you gotta be tough as nails to do that kind of thing. But it wasn't the kind of thing that I think, it's not like skiing steep couloirs or free soloing or, it's like this different kind of toughness, this grit that was so cool. I'm like, that's the kind of thing that really inspires me now, is people who get an idea for a way to connect to other people or a new or interesting or novel way to interact with the world around them, and do it even though it's really hard and they probably have a bunch of different challenges, whether they're physical or finding the funding or the time off despite their busy day job. That kind of thing resonates with me so much more than skiing a peak no one's ever skied before, or right. I'm just like, I mean, don't get me wrong, that's cool. It's not me, and it was never going to be me.
Yeah, I'm totally agree. I mean, if you found something that you want to do and you can resonate with that type of adventure, then you will be tough and you'll be proud of your toughness. But if you do something that other people say that, wow, that's cool, but it doesn't resonate with you, then it's like, I don't know why I want to do it. Why do I want to invest so much time and energy to do it? And things kind of like just follow other people. Yeah. Then totally. I think that's stupid because I want to make my own decision for my life. And so everybody can choose their own adventure, something they really resonate with. And I think being tough is a good quality. And you say that, oh, I'm actually, or maybe strong, just I'm stronger, I'm tougher than I thought I was. And then you can keep pushing yourself to do something that you really want to do.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. And I think, I think about like what qualities are most important to me. And like what not to be morbid, but I think about like at my funeral one day, what do I hope people say about me? And sure, I want to be thought of as tough. Like that's a quality I admire, and so of course I like hope people think that about me. But when I really think about it, I don't I don't care if people list my accomplishments in terms of like a job that I had or a route that I skied or anything like that. I hope people say like she was a really good friend, right? Like I hope people say Emma always checked in with me when I was having a hard time. She was always ready to support and listen. Or like um I hope people think I was funny, right? Like there's all these things that I'm like I think about how I want to be remembered and what I want my legacy to be. And, I think about this a lot, particularly since having a kiddo. And I really am thinking a lot about like, what's my place in this world, not just in the outdoor industry, but more broadly in the world. And like, what kind of an impression do I want to leave? And I think it's that. I think that certainly some toughness and grit, but also some softness, right? I think there's like a lot of beauty in that too, and like taking care of each other and being willing and able to mentor people who are coming up and want to learn some of the same skills that you have, and openness to learning new things. I think like toughness gets a really good or like gets a reputation as being this like really important skill, but sometimes being kind of soft is really challenging too. And I think it's good. I think it's important to know when to be soft.
True. It's like water. Water is tough, but water is soft. And
I like that. Yeah. Yes.
I stole it from Bruce Lee. Bruce Lee said, "Be water, be like water." Yeah, and I really like it. And then let's talk a little bit about your Avalanche, your real work right now.
Yeah.
And how did you? Well, you did mention a little bit, but how did you? It seems like you're very enthusiastic about this job. And how did it all start? And then what's your main thing, and what's keep evolving?
Yeah. That's a great question, and I am really enthusiastic about it. Let's see. My introduction to the snow and avalanche world was in graduate school. I just thought it was all so fascinating. And so I sort of kind of kept a toe in that world, even as I did some other jobs and, during my raft guiding phase, and worked a few other jobs. And then at some point, this position came up with AIARE for a program manager. Or at the time, I think actually it was a curriculum specialist. And I was like, well, I'm really interested in snow and avalanches, and I have a background in curriculum design. And I was already working with AIARE a little bit in a marketing capacity. I also did a little bit of marketing and communications on the side. And so when this full-time job came up with AIARE, I was really excited to pursue it. And, I ended up getting that job and working with Liz Riggs-Meter, who was at the time the education director at AIARE. And she and I had really well-aligned educational philosophies. And I was able to get a lot of really wonderful mentorship from her and kind of learn about the way AIARE functions. So just super, super broad overview in case listeners aren't familiar with AIARE. AIARE is a nonprofit organization, and basically AIARE creates avalanche education curriculum, both for folks recreating in the backcountry and for professionals. We direct deliver programs to professionals, so the AIARE Pro 1 and Pro 2. And then we also create curriculum for folks from anybody who's never been in the backcountry or never spent much time in the backcountry to folks who are learning a little bit more and maybe want to pursue a professional track. And that curriculum gets delivered to the public through our network of about 115 providers, mostly in the West, but a few in the Northeast as well. And AIARE is the largest provider of avalanche education curriculum in the United States. So we, on average, the last few years, there was a big spike during COVID, but on average, we see like 11 or 12,000 students every year, which is a lot of people getting a backcountry education. And yeah, so that's kind of the overview of what AIARE does. And when Liz moved on last summer, when I got back from maternity leave, I stepped into her role as the education director. And as with many important challenges, I felt like I had really big shoes to fill, and I still feel a little bit like I'm kind of, getting my feet under me. But I feel like I have an opportunity. Sometimes I feel really frustrated by the things that still happen in our industry, like how few women are still in our industry, and even feeling like I, as a young woman in the industry, have a seat at the table and a voice that people listen to. But even when I feel frustrated by whether interactions or a series of interactions, I keep telling myself that the best way to affect change is from within the industry. And now that I'm in this position, in a director level role, and I'm able to kind of guide the vision for this program, my hope is that I can help affect positive change from within the industry. That's the idea, anyway.
And from what you just described, that I have a few questions.
Yeah.
One is, so you were originally interviewed for program manager, but basically curriculum, you said curriculum specialist, right?
Yep.
And I would love to know a little bit more about what they want a curriculum specialist to accomplish. Because I teach newer guys, and I think curriculum design is kind of very important.
Yeah.
And so I'm like curious, and also you said that you have a background in that. And what exactly did you learn from your school, and then how you apply those skills?
Yeah. So I guess I'll answer your last question first. When I was in graduate school, I had a number of opportunities to either design or update curriculum, starting with we had a co-op through the graduate school where there's a lot of folks homeschool in Alaska due to how far away and the difficulty of busing, right? So there was a homeschool co-op, this little, I think there were probably maybe 30-ish kids at the time. And graduate students in the program would teach or co-teach a class to the homeschool co-op. And I think kiddos ranged from about 5 to about 12. And, there were classes for each grade. And I think the first year that I was there, I had kids it was a class called Natural Numbers and Nouns, I remember. And they were third graders. And it was basically, I was tasked with creating a semester-long curriculum. I was given a list of learning outcomes, and I kind of was familiarized with the resources that we had, and I was tasked with building a semester-long curriculum and then teaching it. It was a very trial by fire. Like so many teachers, I constantly was like, okay, I'm barely caught up this week. What are we going to do tomorrow? Like, what's next? But that made me also really good at being able to create kind of this, using a formula to create a really good lesson. And so I think, the components of a really good lesson are super simple, but that formative assessment, seeing where your students are to begin with, building a path to get them from where they are to where they need to be, and using good instructional techniques to help them build the skills they need to get from where they are to where you want them. And then doing that summative assessment to understand that, check for understanding. Did I actually meet the learning outcome? What do students need to be able to do at the end of this lesson? And so I got really good at doing that pretty quickly and on the fly, and doing those formative assessments and reading the room. And it was kind of that semester was challenging, but I think I learned a lot of really good skills. And obviously, teaching third graders how to ID different grasses in a wetland is really different than teaching adults how to identify avalanche terrain. But the principles are still really the same. And so when I got this job at AIARE as a curriculum specialist, AIARE has curriculum for its AIARE 1, AIARE 2, and Avalanche Rescue courses. And basically my job was to continually update the curriculum. So AIARE updates its curriculum based on new research that comes out, both in terms of educational best practices and in terms of like the actual snow science. So we make updates to curriculum then. Also, you know, one of my big projects when I started was that first COVID year, the 2020-21 season. A lot of folks, including AIARE, built online learning platforms because we were like, oh no, we can't get people together in person. How are we going to get this information to people? So we threw together our online learning, and then once the dust settled, it was time to revisit it and make sure that it actually was like good, solid education that was meeting learning outcomes, using educational best practices. And, you know, I think a lot of what was already there was really good, but it needed help to become better and more student-centered and appropriate for students. Like taking out, for example, like one of my first big projects was, you know, translating information and subject matter from subject matter experts to lay people. I think sometimes there's this feeling of like, we have to use the jargon or it doesn't seem, quote, correct. But actually, for the most part, like lay people don't need to know they don't need to necessarily know the exact metamorphism process that causes X, Y, and Z to happen in the snowpack. What they really need to know is, bottom line, what am I looking for here, right? Like, bottom line, is this safe? Is this a place that I feel comfortable going with my risk tolerance, or is it not? And so doing a lot of scrubbing jargon and making sure that things were understandable to lay people, creating checks for understanding that were not just something we wanted students to know, because that's like impossible to measure a lot of the time, to what do we want students to do. So a lot of what existed was really good and had really good information and needed a little help being translated into something that was student-centered and that followed educational best practices.
And so you mentioned student center quite a few times. For example, say I am a recreational backcountry traveler, right? So then you use plain English to explain the jargons will be really helpful for me, because I just need to be safe and then to assess the risk, go in or not go in. But then is that kind of, and then if they are, say, avalanche instructors, and then you will use a different set of principle. So then, because their goal is then they would eventually teach.
Yeah.
Something like that? Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, yes, I think the content looks a little different each time depending on the audience, but I know it sounds like such an oversimplification, but it really is true. Like the same principles really apply to our instructor training program that do to our recreational programs. So, you know, our instructors, all AIARE instructors, in order to be qualified to teach AIARE courses, go through a 5-day course called an instructor training program. And one of the prerequisites for that program is that they've completed the Pro 1, which is kind of the baseline professional avalanche education. So we know that they're coming to us with the requisite skills and experience, like they're kind of entry-level subject matter experts. And our job in those 5 days is to give them a crash course in educational best practices. So we're not there to practice digging pits. We're not there to practice, you know, shredding the gnar. We're really there to focus on how to be a really good teacher. And it gets a little meta here, but it's the same principles. So when when we're teaching those folks, giving them an opportunity to practice what they're learning, like doing experiential education with potential or, with instructor candidates, we're doing a lot of the same things. We're doing the formative assessment. We're using good instructional techniques to bring those folks from where they're starting to the intended learning outcomes. And at the end, we're checking for understanding. We're checking to see, have you met the learning outcomes? Are you going to be able to conversantly instruct recreational avalanche students? And so we're doing the same things that we're teaching them to do with their students. And I've seen this modeled super well on a couple of area instructor training courses where I watch these incredibly talented educators model the kinds of skills that their future instructors are going to bring back to their students, hopefully. And it is really cool to watch the evolution from day one, where folks are maybe a little nervous and maybe not quite sure what they've gotten themselves into, to feeling, maybe they're a little awkward pretending to teach in front of their peers and kind of stumbling over their words, to by the end, really watching people making eye contact with each of their students and adjusting their teaching on the fly if they see that somebody isn't following along. Watching that evolution is incredibly cool.
The check for learning is a very important component. How did you check for learning when you're doing online courses? Because I think sometimes in person it's easier because you can get a lot of information from the learners. And so, yeah.
No, that's a really good question. I mean, the bottom line is in-person education is generally a lot better than online education. I mean, I think ask any classroom teacher who had to do hybrid or Zoom education during the peak COVID years, and they'll tell you they could not wait to get back into their classrooms. So we started out, we had this online learning that we started during early COVID, and we have made some pretty significant updates to the online learning and I think improved it. We've added some checks for understanding that are kind of, they're more traditional, I wouldn't call them a quiz question necessarily, but basically we're asking people, they get to the end of the topic or lesson and they're asked maybe it's a couple essay questions, or they're asked to match the symbol to the definition, that kind of thing. Identify avalanche terrain in this photo, click here, here, and here. So we do have some checks for understanding in our online learning. We did, even during COVID, the classroom portion. So the national standard for level 1 avalanche course is 24 hours. At least 60% of that time needs to be in the field, and the rest can be in a classroom or in a Zoom session, some combination of a Zoom session and online learning. So there was still that 60% field requirement, and folks were using social distancing protocols and masking, and but the classroom portion, rather than taking place indoors, we had people do from the comfort of their own couch, so as not to spread their germs to one another. But so we were still able to do some checks for understanding. Folks completed the online learning, and then we were able to do some of those checks for understanding in person once people showed up. But yeah, I mean, it's challenging. I think one of the things always with any learning, but particularly, thinking about adult learners or, and the same with clients, right, is these are people who have a full-time job and probably lots of other obligations too. And so when they get to your class, they probably have all of this other stuff going on too, right? They're thinking about family obligations and what they're doing next weekend, and there's all these other things. And so I think how we can set up systems that make it more accessible for people to learn, even if they're not already subject matter experts. I think there's sometimes this feeling of if you don't already know all the definitions, there's almost this sort of exclusive kind of cool kids club. If you don't already know what this is, don't even bother to ask. Which is, aren't we past that at this point?
Yeah. And obviously you keep updating curriculum because there will be new research coming in, better practice, and probably another component is probably you would collect feedback from the learners, right? So both like during the teaching and then maybe afterwards, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So do you also have to put some work onto like how to design the questionnaire for collecting feedback and how effective that is? Because sometimes people don't
Yeah,
really fill out feedback form and stuff.
totally. They don't in general. Um, yeah, we actually we have done a couple of sort of informal surveys like that. And then the last few years we worked with a third party to do a program evaluation. And so we worked with this really wonderful collaborator, Dr. Kelly McNeil at Eastern Oregon University. And she's also an AIARE instructor. And she worked with us to build a survey that we delivered to folks after their AIARE 1 and Rescue courses. And that program evaluation gave us a lot of information about how effective our courses are at changing people's behavior. So Kelly's an expert in public health. And so we took this public health approach to understanding like, okay, backcountry or avalanche classes are a public health intervention. So we're trying to change people's behavior to make better or safer decisions. Is that working? Is that doing what we think it is? And what we did find is that there are, it was a 3-year study, or it was performed over 3 consecutive winters. And there is, of course, more research to be done. But we did find that in general, students' perception was that they had improved some of their backcountry habits as a result of taking their avalanche courses. So things like checking the forecast, those are things that maybe a habit that students didn't have before they took their course, but did have after they took their course. So there's things like that there's also a few things like we found that folks didn't necessarily improve in their ability to perform what we call a departure check. So make sure that their transceiver is working, make sure everybody has all the gear they need. There wasn't a significant improvement in how often people felt like they did that or how effectively they did it. And so that's one of the updates that we're going to make to our curriculum next is, that didn't necessarily work the way we taught it, didn't necessarily have the impact we wanted. So how can we change our curriculum to emphasize the importance of that skill and to teach it to students in a way that they'll retain better? So yes, that was a long answer to your question is, we're doing this program evaluation to understand what outcomes we've met and what outcomes we still have some work to do to meet.
And right now you step out to the role of education director so you can have more influence on, say, the vision.
Yeah, I mean, that's the idea. I think I was really fortunate when Liz was my boss that we had really closely aligned visions. But yes, I think that the avalanche education world needs to take a step towards student-centered education. And I think that it's really important that we, rather than just telling students what we want them to learn or treating them like they're sort of these mini scaled down avalanche professionals, it's really important that we take their goals and teach them something that's going to meet their goals. At the end of the day, AIARE's mission is to save lives through avalanche education. And I believe the most effective way to do that is to meet learners where they are, create programs for audiences that don't necessarily have that access to that kind of programming, whether it's underrepresented groups or travel modes. For example, there aren't a lot of snowshoe specific avalanche courses out there. So, which, you'd think, because snowshoeing is so popular, you'd think there would be more of that, but I hope to help develop more of those kinds of programs. I think my vision is that avalanche education is accessible to more people, and also that avalanche education includes things like just teaching people to avoid avalanche terrain if they want to do that. Not everybody wants to go ski off the summit of Mount Baker, right? I think there are this huge range of what people want to do outside, and avalanche education needs to meet folks where they are rather than just try to funnel everybody into the same couple of classes.
Huh. I was curious. You mentioned about travel mode. So you mean that in the past, maybe like most of avalanche education is more like, oh, you're going to backcountry skiing, and maybe say not, I don't know, you say snowshoe or hiking. And would that be very different? About.
No, it's a really good question. Yeah, so most avalanche education in the US, most recreational avalanche education is really geared towards people on skis or split boards, backcountry snowboards. And there is also a growing movement of motorized avalanche education, so people on snowmobiles. And AIARE does offer motorized snowmobile education. Um, the big differences between, for example, with snowshoeing, the big difference is the audience's goals. So as a skier or split boarder, the reason you're doing it is because you want to get to slide downhill really fast on something, right? Like the fun part is going down if you're on skis or a split board. Whereas when you're snowshoeing, the way that you move through the terrain is really different and your goals are really different, right? Like often people are snowshoeing as a way to mountaineer, right? Like they want to get to the top of a peak, but the going down part is no more fun than the going up part. They're the same amount of fun. And so you're probably looking for different routes. You'd probably be looking for like different ways to interact with a terrain feature. Probably not going to be, for example, you're not going to be seeking out deep powder because that is no fun on snowshoes in the way that it is on skis. So the content of the course, like the avalanche avoidance, the snow science, a lot of that stuff wouldn't change, but the way the course is delivered needs to change pretty significantly. And so even though there is some content that stays the same, we want to be able to educate people in a way that actually is meaningful to their experience and be able to set up classes that give people the skills they need to replicate those good decisions, right? So not just repeat the same tours that they did on their course, but be able to really be an active participant in their own risk management and replicate that. It's a framework that allows people to replicate their decision making in the backcountry.
I see. Now I understand. Yeah. So it's just kind of like, well, because this person choose a different travel mode or their goal is different, so you have to stay in their shoes, even you are looking at the same scientific data.
Exactly. Yes.
So help them to interpret so they can relate to. Otherwise, just like, I'm not scared, even though the knowledge is the same, but then the application can be different.
Yeah, and I think the way you experience a class has so much of an impact on what you actually take away from it, right? I mean, there's this, there's there's Maslow's hierarchy, right? This idea that like your basic needs have to be met before you can move on to things like feeling fulfilled or content. And so if people are hungry or cold or tired or homesick or feel out of place or embarrassed, they're not going to learn as well as if they're in a safe and positive learning environment. And so that's, a core tenet of education, but also something that I think, of course, in the backcountry, you are often going to be a little bit cold, a little bit tired, probably a little hungry. But, if you're the only snowshoer in a group of skiers and everybody else is moving quite a bit faster than you, and everybody else is like, okay, we're going to do this. We're going to, skin up this way so that we can ski down this. And you're on snowshoes and you're like, I don't want to do that. And also like, I'll be moving a lot slower. Folks will have to wait for me. Got that on your mind. Like, you're just not going to have the same kind of learning experience as if you're in a cohort of folks doing the same thing as you, right?
True. Yes. Yeah, that's right. Yeah, you can't overlook of like how their inner feeling to affect the learning outcome.
Yeah.
Yeah, totally. Whew. And I also came across the serious article you wrote titled Women in the Avalanche Industry. So you also mentioned about there's not that much women in this industry, and then maybe this courses are not that accessible to, say, underrepresented groups. So is that also one of like a big mission of AIARE? Yeah.
Yeah. I'm glad to say that in the time since I did that thesis project, we've made a lot of progress. There are more women in the industry today, certainly, than there were in 2014, I think, when I wrote my graduate thesis. And there's always more work to be done, right? I think I'm really lucky at AIARE, actually, that our leadership team is made up largely of women, and I think we have been really intentional about building programs that make it possible for women to direct the vision for those programs. I think we've been working on introducing more and more affinity programming. So there's a women's specific instructor training course. There's a Pro 1 that's just for women. And we've expanded those in recent years to also include other genders. So we also have what's now called the Professional Growth Network, which is, again, a way for folks of underrepresented identities to get mentorship in becoming Avalanche professionals. It's only open to folks of underrepresented identities, and there's a variety of identities that that folks are eligible to join. Basically, we want to make a safe space for people who wouldn't necessarily have access to mentorship otherwise, or necessarily know where to start to be able to learn about how to build sustainable careers in the Avalanche industry. So I cannot take credit for that program at all. That program started around the same time that I was starting at AIARE. And our wonderful program manager there, Aziza Singh, has done an awesome job of building really sustainable programming and bringing in a lot of different voices and making sure that there are opportunities for tons of different people to be heard and to connect with one another. So that program is certainly something that I'm proud to be associated with at AIARE. And also there's just still always more work to be done. Every time I start to feel really excited about how things are going, sometimes I'll have an experience where someone will make a really inappropriate comment on a course, and I'm like, are you, like, a sexist comment? And there's just things, there's these little reminders that we still have work to do. And fortunately, I have this really wonderful team that I get to work with who, they're all these really talented educators from a variety of backgrounds. And I constantly feel like this team is in my corner, and I think handles it really well when we have incidents like that. But every now and again, we'll get these, what we call behavioral or inclusion incidents, where someone will, like I said, make an inappropriate comment, or, even just like seeing the state of the world in the United States right now. I think sometimes there are these moments where I'm like, man, is this really still where we are? Is this still the conversation that we're having? And I don't want to put my head in the sand, but I also don't want to let those outliers bring me down, right? I think there's important work to be done, and we got to keep on chugging if we're going to get it done.
Yeah. And what do you think about, I'm totally sold about diversity is very important, because, you need different voices. So then it just can let us be able to make decision better. That's just kind of my perspective of like that. I don't want to just be stuck into my own thinking. So that's why that I think diversity, no matter where, is like very important. You need to be able to see outside the box from different perspective and everything. So is it like, did you see the effect that when there are more women avalanche instructors, does it make the industry a little bit more robust?
Mhm. Yeah. I mean, the short answer is just unequivocally yes, right? I mean, um, yeah, I think I think sort of the arguments against diversity or the arguments against inclusion are always these things like, oh, we have to make sure it's merit based. We have to make sure that the people who work the hardest or get right. And it's really, it's easy for me to see that the people who work the hardest aren't always the people who end up with the best jobs, right? I mean, there are so many reasons for that we don't have time to get into in this conversation, like those systemic inequalities. But it's not just that women and other underrepresented minorities deserve a seat at the table for the sake of having a seat at the table. It's also that our presence improves safety for everybody, right? I mean, you think about um, if we keep, if we reserve the inner circle for just this one tight-knit group of homogenous people who all think the same and all have the same ideas, how many perspectives are we missing out on? So from a purely selfish standpoint of making sure that we're safer and we have more perspectives and more ability to catch holes in the system and make sure everyone's safe, it's a no-brainer that we should be bringing more diverse voices to the table. Not only that it's the right thing to do and that everyone deserves the same opportunities to be part of this, but also it like these voices of their own merit and their own unique experience really add something to the conversation. And there's a richness and a texture that you just don't get if everybody thinks the same.
Yeah. That's my argument too. I think it's just not only the right thing to do, but everybody actually benefits.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I'm like, whether you do it because it's the right thing or because you're going to benefit, I can't let myself care. I just want you to do the right thing in the end.
Sure. Yeah. And now I understand a little bit, but I still want to ask you this question. So you study English literature and then you could possibly become an English teacher back then. Yeah. So you must be really good at writing. So I really like both your thesis topic in grad school and then the book that you published. It's I think there's a lot about decision making here, right?
Mm.
So let me review this. So your thesis topic is outdoor, decision making in Alaska dynamic mountain environments. Yeah, and then your book, which published probably a few years ago, right? And yeah,
Yeah,
that
2021.
reckoning, 2021, learning from accidents in the outdoors. So there's all sorts of a lot of like decision making. It seems like more on the same line. So you just keep that train going, and then gradually you collect all the stories to write this book. Tell me about this one.
Yeah. Thank you, as always, for giving me an opportunity to talk about my book. I feel like as an author, I'm like, any opportunity to talk about my book a little bit, I'm excited to let people know about it. So Dead Reckoning is, it's a collection of narratives about near misses or accidents, and what we can learn from them. I think there's this really rich tradition in the avalanche world and in the outdoor industry of learning from our mistakes. I think there's a lot of really good examples of that out there, including things like the Snowy Torrents, which is a publication of the American Avalanche Association, Accidents in North American Climbing by the American Alpine Club. These are things that, like, for a long time, we have this tradition of sitting down and looking at all of the accident data and trying to make sense of it or trying to understand what it means for us. And looking at the data was really interesting. And there is some of that for a variety of different outdoor activities or regions. But I was kind of interested in what we could learn, even from like what patterns would emerge from events that seemed not necessarily related. So in my book, there's a little bit about avalanches and a little bit about whitewater rafting and a chapter about sea kayaking and one about cold injuries, thinking about skiing in Yellowstone in winter. Like there's a really big variety of stuff. And at the end of the day, what I hope people take away from it is the need to have some autonomy and to use a framework to make good decisions in the backcountry. And so there are a couple of things that no matter where you are or what you're doing, generally make sense. Things like have a plan and tell someone where you're going, like kind of these basic things, and also a few more nuanced things. But in general, I think I had been writing. I'd written a little bit in college and done a little bit of freelancing throughout grad school and after grad school, and eventually for a while was working full time as a freelance writer. And so I'd started kind of building up a few of these ideas in my head. And when I had an opportunity to pitch Falcon, which is my publisher, I sort of felt like it was almost like a culmination, right, of like all of my life's work so far had been devoted to educating people in the backcountry. And so here was a way to almost write almost a memoir that was like, here's a little bit about my life and what I've done so far. And here are some things that you can take away from some of my own mistakes and also those of other people in the backcountry. So it felt like sort of this really cool opportunity to continue to educate people and also to tell a really good story.
Yeah, I'm actually very curious about your approach. So back then when I took those courses, I learned, I was teaching, and then there will be a time that we set aside, just like, okay, let's read an example or a case from, say, the North American, the AAC published, right?
Yeah.
And then we will all gather to discuss what else can we do differently so that we would in the future prevent the same mistake. And it's all very technical and serious. And then sometimes, the guy service I work with, we will have a discussion, like Zoom meeting, discuss near misses, right? So we share about the near misses, what we can learn from it. And then everything is about like serious. And it's very intriguing for me I went to Amazon online and saw some review and people talking about it's like entertaining in a way. And then they just said, wow, it's a good afternoon read, on a Saturday afternoon, they can read from like one sitting. And I was just like, back then when I discussed those near misses, I was just like, you know what, 2 cases, that's it. Because it's kind of heavy. Yeah. And so in a way that I know is important, but sometimes if your mind just have this resistance, you just like, all right, I want to keep it from distance, then I can maybe, just like the learning outcome may not be that effective. So I'm like curious about your approach. So people are just like, wow, I learned a lot. And then I'm actually willing to read. And it's actually a very interesting read. Yeah. So how was your approach,
Yeah. I mean, I'm very flattered by that impression. I think I think, I mean, first of all, it is really heavy subject matter, right? I mean, this book discusses a number of deaths, right? Like, and I don't want to make light of that. And also, I think that there is the thing that I feel like is missing from these really kind of clinical, technical reviews of incidents is empathy. And I think that is the key. Almost every time I read an accident report or a near miss, I think some version of like, that could have been me. Like I think any outdoor professional will tell you that they've made a lot of mistakes. And if someone tells you that they haven't made a lot of mistakes, they probably haven't been doing it that long. And if not, maybe they're not paying enough attention. But like, we've all made mistakes. And I think, a lot of times, like if I pick up a copy of Accidents in North American Mountaineering, and I read some of the mistakes that people made, I'm like, I've done that. I've done that. Oh, yep, I've done that. And I just got really lucky. And I think so much of it, it's really easy to kind of get into the mode where, when you're watching like a horror movie and they're about to go into the really dark basement and like they hear the noise and they get the flashlight and you're like, don't go in the basement. What are you doing? Stay on your couch, get under the blanket. And they're like picking up their flashlight and opening the door and like, what's going to happen to them. And you are like, what the hell are you doing? But like, it's really easy to do that when we read about accidents. But also we have to think about, if we put ourselves in those people's shoes, there's a lot of times what they did makes more sense than if we just, you think about like people who got really lost or people who got really off route and maybe didn't stay put, right? Like there's all these kind of what we think of as these rookie mistakes, and yet really experienced people still make them. And there's a reason that happens, which is that, when we get really stressed, we don't necessarily always make the best decisions. And keeping some empathy and not having that moment of like, oh, you idiot, why are you going in the basement? About thinking like, this person doesn't think there's a monster or a murderer in their basement. They just like think that the washing machine is making a funny noise and they're going to go down and check it out. Like, they have different information than we do in the moment. And I think so that empathy is the key, I think, to making the review of an accident or a near miss something that, takes it from being something that feels really clinical and something you're really removed from to really feeling like it's resonant and like it's something that could have happened to you and something that you have to continue to work to avoid. And I think the other thing about being empathetic and putting yourself in someone's shoes is like, yes, you can take a moment to try to understand what they were thinking or why they did what they did. But also, most of the time in the moments before these things happened, a lot of the time those people were having the same kinds of really meaningful experiences that we were talking about at the beginning of our conversation, right? Like, not that long before getting really off route, somebody might have been having one of those really meaningful moments where they were sitting their coffee and it was totally silent and like a bald eagle flew overhead, right? Like, those people also were doing the things they were doing for the same reasons that I go outside and that my students and your clients go outside. And something happened and we can't necessarily fully understand what it is. We can try to prevent it from happening to us or to others, but that empathy, I think, is really key. And not only is it important to understanding why those people did what they did, but also in addition to those really magical moments, there's also funny moments, right? Like, if we are being empathetic and putting ourselves in people's shoes, they also had these full lives of being funny or silly or making a mistake that made them laugh. And I think that's some of where the entertainment piece comes from, is like maybe not so much gallows humor as just like finding these kind of funny, quirky moments that make us human.
Yeah, like empathy and compassion. I guess I never really read accident report in that perspective. Of course, I understand that accident happened for a reason. It happened. Otherwise, you won't be in the report, right?
Right.
And then I won't just quickly say, oh, no, look at them. Didn't I taught them not to do this? Because there's definitely a lot of people jump onto just like you mentioned a rookie mistake, I would never make that mistake. But the thing is, I mean, like me as a guy for so long, I make mistakes. There's some near misses that I have. So I know that I do make mistakes. So sometimes to think about, well, to try your best to experience what other people experience, you say, wow, that could have been me. Might make the learning, might inspire more learning and then make the learning more effective too. Yeah.
Yeah,
Who
I mean,
knows?
I think, you said you hadn't thought of it that way, and I think we're not really taught to, right? We're taught to like read the accident report and
Be critical.
see like, right, here's what they did, here's the mistake, or like here's the pinpoint of where things started to go wrong. And you think about, okay, here's what was happening. You think about, oh, the weather started to turn and they should have turned around. But you're not necessarily thinking like, what was this person thinking as that was happening? And I think that empathy is missing from so much in our world right now. I think like this is one area where it's really easy once you get in the habit to approach with empathy and compassion. And I think like and also to give yourself the same kinds of empathy that you would offer to those other people. Like you said, I make mistakes. I'm going to continue to make mistakes. I don't want to make a catastrophic mistake. So how can I create systems that prevent that from happening? But yeah, I think like let's be realistic. We're not going to not make mistakes.
Yes, that's right. Yeah. Cool. Wow. Yeah, thank you, Emma, for sharing so much. I feel that even just talking with you, I could potentially be a better educator myself. And
Wow, thank you. That's such a compliment, Ting Ting.
yeah, I mean, of course, I still have a lot of work to do, but you inspire me to think a lot of things that I observed. So that's why, I need to listen to like different person's perspective so I can reach my teacher.
Wow, well, thank you. And thanks so much for having me. It was really fun to chat with you.
It's definitely very fun to chat with you. And anything you want to add before we close this conversation?
Um, Gosh, I don't think so. I mean, you asked such thoughtful questions, and yeah, it was really fun to have this conversation. And I always love to geek out about good education. And yeah, I think it's so cool. I've listened to a handful of episodes of your podcast, and it's really cool what a diverse group of people you found with different kinds of backgrounds and different interests. And um, I think that is what it's so cool now to look from, when I was in grad school and wrote my thesis about this like lack of women that I saw in specifically this one niche of the industry. Um, and now there's a whole podcast devoted to women guides. And I think that's so cool. And there's no shortage and we don't all have the same perspective. It's just, like we were just saying, when you bring more people into the room, more voices into the room, we all can learn a lot. And it's really cool to see the lineup. And I'm so honored to get to be a part of this conversation. So thank you for inviting me.